Thank you very much for welcoming me to Istanbul. I love this city, and it's nice to see so many people here, all focused around innovation in the insurance industry. So why do we even need to bother? Lots of people are talking about innovation the industry is going to be disrupted, so we have to innovate to basically protect ourselves as an industry. But there's also the positive side as well. A report that was done by Accenture shows that there is a $375 billion opportunity of new revenue that we as an industry can take advantage of. If we create propositions that are more relevant to that next generation of consumer and those next generation of opportunities. So there's the positive side. There is also the negative side as well. So one of the things that I find quite interesting is the average lifespan of a company. So in the 50s, the average lifespan of a company was about 60-odd years. Now it's dropped down to below 18 years. So big, large corporates are not living as long as they used to. And that means a lot of you guys as well. And what are they being taken over by? They're being taken over by young unicorn internet businesses. And if you look at most of the businesses, the billion-dollar-plus privately owned businesses, down here, most of these guys didn't exist 10-plus years ago. But yet they've taken the market by storm. They're disrupting most traditional businesses. And there's going to be more of those coming through. So, A, global corporate businesses are not living as long. And B, we're getting these guys coming in much, much quicker and growing at phenomenal rates. And if you look at, and you've all heard the stories about the disruptors in the marketplace and the fact that Blockbuster got disrupted by Netflix and the taxi firms got disrupted by Uber. I think the interesting point is, though, that if you look at the examples, they're not people from within those industries. So most of those major disruptions came from people from outside of the marketplace because they saw something in a different way to the way that the industry was looking at them. So we have to ask ourselves, who's going to be the disruptor for the insurance market? And there's a pretty good chance it's not going to be an insurance business that's going to disrupt the insurance industry. I think one of the most interesting ones is, I'm guessing you all know Dyson, vacuum cleaner people. So Dyson have just invested $1 billion in opening a car manufacturing business in Singapore. That's a vacuum cleaner about to create an electric car business. And the bit that triggered that was because they felt their motors were now so powerful they could drive a car. So they're going to go into car manufacturing. And they believe they can do it much, much cheaper than virtually everybody else that's producing cars at the moment. I find that fascinating because that's now a real threat to Tesla. So what's driving some of this innovation, and why as corporates should we care? And I put it down to 5 major factors. So the fact that consumer behavior is changing. We've heard about the way that consumers use Amazon and what they expect. So I can order something at 11 o'clock at night, and it arrives for me the next morning by the time I turn up at the office. But yet, when I make an insurance claim, I still have to, in many cases, still complete forms, and I don't really get to get a decision for several days or several weeks and stuff like that. But yet, why can Amazon do those things and we as an industry can't? Because at the end of the day, most of the time, we're just replacing something. Disruptive technologies. So, we've heard about blockchain, we've heard about AI. There's lots of that stuff around. The interesting thing is, it's coming at us at a phenomenal pace at the moment, much, much faster than we've ever seen before. You're starting to see wearable clothes. So I was chatting to somebody earlier, and we were talking about socks that an elderly person can wear, that we can track their ECG, we can track their temperature, we can tell if their shoes are too tight. That's from wearing a pair of socks, so let alone wearing Fitbands or Apple Watches and stuff like that. The fact that we're starting to see lots of new data as well, data that we're not used to dealing with, data that's very different to the way that we underwrite at the moment. So that's having a big impact. Next generation business models. I think this is where the insurtechs have been really useful for us as well, in that they're creating business models that challenge the way that we create insurance products at the moment. And then I think the biggest threat is the adjacent industry. So what's BMW doing that's going to have an impact on our business? So we kind of look at, we kind of look at driverless cars. But what about driverless apartments? So what about a hotel company saying a motorhome is a driverless car, but actually I could live in it? So if we're going to have mobile workers in the future, they're probably not going to be in hotels, right? Because I need to be in Berlin for 2 days, I need to be in Munich the next 2 days. So why can't I be transported around? And while I'm sleeping, I actually end up where I need to be next. So there are hotel companies looking at the impact of that on their business. But that will have an impact on insurance as well. So again, are we actually thinking far enough about what adjacent industries are doing? Excuse me. That's all kind of looking at from the outside in. But then we did a survey, and if anybody wants copies of the survey results, just drop me a note and I can share that with you. But we asked the question about what's stopping people within the industry actually innovating. And in most cases, the 50% plus response is culture. They don't feel comfortable being able to innovate from the inside. So whether you're looking at what the barrier is or kind of what's stopping them being able to do it, or it's typically resources, skills, but it's nearly always culture as well within the top 3 factors. So we have, within Rainmaking Innovation, we have a framework to allow insurance companies to be able to build an innovation culture internally. We call it 5 levers because you can move each of these separately to make a big difference. Obviously, if you use all 5, that you have a much bigger impact when you bring them all together. So I'll run through these quickly one by one. The first is strategy. I'm just curious as to, so of the insurers here, how many of you guys actually have an innovation strategy? Just hands up for me, please. There's got to be somebody who has to have an innovation strategy, right? Kind of 3 or 4 in a room full of people. But this is the problem, right? We all have innovation labs. We all have a head of innovation. We all have an innovation manager. We all have an innovation scouting person. We don't have an innovation strategy. That's kind of like saying, let's do marketing without a marketing strategy, or let's run our business without a business strategy. So you need to have an innovation strategy to start with. And the thing within that innovation strategy is you really need to understand what you want to actually do with innovation. It's no good just saying, oh, we're going to find some great cool ideas and actually start developing something. You've got to know what you want to do. How far out are you looking? What areas are you interested in? Are you interested in just improving your internal processes, or are you interested in game-changing the world? And that will have an impact, and that will have an influence on the way that you actually innovate within your organization. The second thing is capabilities. The amount of times I meet a head of innovation who was the ex-claims manager within the insurance company, or who was the ex-underwriting manager within the insurance company. It's kind of like making me head of HR. I've got a brain, I can probably work out what a head of HR is, but I'm not a HR expert. So why do you put people that are not innovation experts into those roles? Because fundamentally, they don't have the skills, they don't have the knowledge. So you need to put people in those roles that actually understand this stuff. And this is not unusual. Virtually every other industry has heads of innovation that are trained innovation people. So I'm not saying you can't get someone to educated up to that point, but if you start with that point as your anchor person, you're going to struggle to then grow that out anywhere else. So capabilities are really important, but then all of your people around as well. So if you're looking at creating an innovation, enterprise-wide innovation function, that involves everybody in your business. And if there's you've got to think about do they understand innovation? Do they understand how to evolve an idea? How do you measure this kind of stuff? So it's really important that you train your people up to be able to innovate effectively. The next thing is governance. It's okay generating lots of ideas, but you kind of have to know what your stage gates are. What's your process for moving an idea from one stage to the next stage? How do you decide when to kill something? How do you decide when to invest in something? And you can't do it just randomly because somebody comes along with an idea and you think, oh, I like that one because it's claims related, and I like claims, so we'll invest in that one or we'll move that one forward. That's not strategic. That's very tactical. So you have to really think about what the governance is around all of that kind of formula so that you have a framework that you're actually working through. You're also going to need to invest in some of these ideas as well. And it's interesting that insurance companies, I'm ex-AXA, so we used to have 500 million budget a year to invest in startups. But the minute you try to do a project internally, if it was over 50K, I had to go to the CEO to get it signed off. That's crazy. But yeah, as a business, we'd invest millions into startups. So what's the difference? So you're discouraging people to actually innovate from the inside out because you make it so difficult. So have a view as to what your innovation criteria is and what kind of things you're interested in doing, and then what's the formula for actually moving some of those things forward. Idea management as well. The number of companies I talk to that when you ask them, so how many ideas are you generating? And the view is, oh, we generate several hundred ideas. How are you managing them? Oh, we record them on a spreadsheet. Really, guys? Like, how do you record an idea on a spreadsheet? And how do you actually manage that when there is professional platforms out there to be able to do this kind of stuff? Communication. If you're going to create an innovation culture within your business, you have to make everybody feel involved. It's really important that you share your successes, but you also share every time you've decided to kill a project so that people know it's okay to work on projects that may not actually go all the way through. But the learning from that shouldn't be restricted to the handful of people that are working on it. The learning from that should extend across the board to the whole organization. So the comms is really important, whether it's communicating with your team internally at a department level, at a country level, but also you'll be working on something potentially that could apply to another office in another country. So again, it's important that you share that because it's pointless them reinventing that wheel and starting all over again when we can actually use a lot of that knowledge to actually be able to solve a problem much more quickly. And it's more valuable for the person that's creating those ideas because it gives them far more exposure. And something that may not be working in London actually may be a much, much better fit in Singapore. No, but the Singapore guys, if they don't know that you're working on it, they're missing those opportunities. And then the fifth one is impact. Now, you generally, if you want to create focus in something, you have to measure it. If you measure the number of ideas that come into the business, guess what? You'll generate a load of ideas, but nothing will happen to most of them. So you have to think about how you measure innovation across the organization. And you have to think about what you want to, you have to be practical about what you measure, because this can't be on the traditional way that we measure stuff, on return on investment, because you probably won't see an investment for a little while. It can't be on how much revenue you're generating, because you probably won't generate any revenue for a couple of years. So there's a number of factors that we have a KPI framework that we use, that we allow insurers to be able to use those to create a dashboard that helps them see how mature their innovation programs are getting, and how they're basically being able to evolve ideas through the process. Also has a cultural impact. So to give you a very quick example, so one insurer I was working with, we were asking them how many cancelled holidays they dealt with. And it's about 10,000 a year. And I said to them, what did you do with the cancelled holidays? And the response was, nothing. We've paid the customer, they're happy, we've done our job. And I'm going, yeah, but you have all of these assets, you have all of these hotel rooms, and you have all of these flights that you now legally own because you've paid for them. Okay, in 2 weeks' time, they'll expire. But today, they exist. And because that department's not measured on what they do with the salvage value of the holidays, they're measured on customer service, nothing got done with any of those holidays. So we were literally throwing them all away. So again, it comes down to what you're measuring will dictate the behavior that comes out of the organization. So having created that kind of process, you have to make sure it's repeatable. It can't be a one-off exercise because you'll get people really excited and then nothing happens and it will just fizzle away. So it's really important. So typically, most of our clients will run this kind of process 4 times a year, so it's continuous. So everybody that has an idea feels like they can come back within a few months and they can resubmit something else. If they have to wait 12 months, they won't bother. And they generally won't do anything with their idea either. So I have a few minutes. So I was going to use the next couple of slides basically just to give you some tips that you can take away and do something practical with, rather than the kind of theoretical stuff. So I constantly get asked about how do you come up with these ideas? How do you come up with something clever and smart that like the way the startups tend to do? And my view is, generally, if you say to people, if you have a great idea, put it forward, you will get very few ideas. It's the norm. If you give away £50 Marks and Spencer's vouchers for a good idea, you won't see many good ideas. Again, because typically, think about the scenario. You're at home, watching television with your partner, and this idea is burning in your head, and you say to your partner, I've got this amazing idea. It's going to save the insurance company millions. And she says, so what are you going to get? Oh, I get £50 Marks and Spencer's vouchers. Hang on a second. That idea is never coming into the business. You've just killed it, even though you've offered them an incentive. So think about the incentives and how you relate it. In that instance, when I was working on that project, we took away the £50 Marks and Spencer's vouchers. We brought in a graphic artist. So if you had a great idea, you got to spend 2 hours with a graphic artist who would basically cartoonize your idea on an A3 sheet. We framed it and presented it back to you. And the reason we did that is because whether you hang it on the wall behind your desk or you take it home and hang it in the bathroom, every time somebody sees that cartoon, they go, what's that? And every time I have to explain what it is, the idea is generating a life of its own. And generally, people go, oh, that's quite clever, but what about this? Which means the idea is evolving. So it then stops just being thrown away and actually starts to grow and do something different. And you also take it away from the person that came up with it as well. You take away the reliance from just the one person who came up with the idea, because now lots of people are involved. And so you can think very differently about the way you incentivize from the back of the idea. Gamification's also very interesting. There were a couple of presentations and people talked about talent. So one of the things that we're looking at in the UK is publishing an industry challenge. So it might be things like, how do you identify drivers falling asleep on the motorway? Now, as an industry, we've never even worried about stuff like that, yet there's thousands of people that die on the motorways every day as a result of somebody falling asleep. So I put that out to a bunch of university students, and they were coming back with things like, oh, why don't you use Shazam to listen to road noise? Can it listen to when I put, what happens when I'm falling asleep? I put the window down, so can I hear the noise of the wind coming into the car? I turn my stereo up, can I detect that? So this is not about going to the car manufacturers and saying, can we put fatigue alert sensors into cars? Yeah, that might happen in 5 years' time. This is about stuff that we can do today, but the idea came from people who don't understand insurance. So the incentive is that we used a platform, an open innovation platform, to do that. And the more the students engaged, the more points they earned. And then the points were exchanged for internships in insurance companies. So we can constantly pose challenges. But what it also does is it helps us identify those really interesting students that may be studying psychology, or they may be studying a subject that they may not think is relevant to insurance, but absolutely it is, because they're thinking about how to solve the problems that we need solutions to. So the comment about not measuring ideas and not tracking ideas using things like Excel spreadsheets. So there are platforms where I can record and manage ideas, and if you set them as challenges, then you can actually see what kind of ideas are coming through the business. You can see where they're coming from. You can see who's connected with who within the business. You can see where your gaps are. So if you're not getting a sufficient number of ideas in regulation, maybe you need to push out a challenge and get people to start thinking about that, because that could have a big impact if nobody's coming up with those kind of ideas. And then lastly, somebody asked me, could I provide a set of tips? So once you've created an innovation culture, how do you embed it within the organization? How do you get it to stay? So I thought of like the 10 or 12 simplest things that you can do to embed an innovation culture. So you can read them for yourself. I'm not going to read them all, but the key things are understand what you're innovating for, what your strategy is. That's really key, because if you don't have that, everything else is not really going to work. Don't rely on your innovation lab to do the innovation. Typically what happens is a lot of insurers will go out, they'll create a nice glass front-walled office, fancy cushions in there, digital screens in there, but what you've done is you've given everybody else in the business an excuse not to innovate, because every time they walk past that room, they go, oh, that's where the innovation guys sit. Now, hang on a second, you're supposed to be innovating as well. Yeah, but that's what they do. So turn your innovation labs into innovation support functions. They should be the center of excellence. They should be like your HR department. So as a manager, I don't need to understand all the HR rules, because I have I have a HR department that guides me and supports me, but I don't rely on them to manage my team and manage what I'm doing within the business. Make sure you bring in people from the outside as well. So as an example, I brought in an A&E consultant into a claims department, because if you think about an A&E department, see it on TV, somebody's just been injured in a car accident, they get rushed in, there's a dozen people all like crazy running around, but it's synchronized chaos. They know what they're all doing. Our claims departments, our complex claims departments, are just the same. The problem is none of them knows how to do handovers properly. So bring in somebody from the outside that's solving that same kind of problem, and let your people just free up their minds and think about how they can utilize some of that thinking and some of those processes. Last bit, I'd say formalize your innovation process. Don't rely on luck. Don't rely on the fact that innovation is just one of those fluffy things that you never know, somebody's going to come up with a great idea. Trust me, it does, that works short term, it's not sustainable. That's me. You're quite welcome to a copy of the slides. If you have any questions, feel free to grab me or drop me an email. If you want a copy of the internal research as well, I'm quite happy to share that too. Thank you very much.